Welcome. This is Bleacher BLUMS, a sports podcast for baseball fans. Now here's Dave Tuttle and the Astros master of banter, Blummer.
Oh, man. Just got done. I was off the golf course, ready to go, get in here on the podcast. It's beautiful weather out here in Houston, and I was fortunate enough to get out there and play a little bit of golf with some good friends. And we are here for another episode of Bleacher BLUMS. It is so good to be in the bleachers. Things have been going great. Podcast is continuing to get downloads. People are responding on our social Nostra network on YouTube. The channel is exploding, and we greatly appreciate all the fans out there who are helping us out. And it has been a good time. I hope everybody enjoyed that last podcast with Jeff Schwartz on it, talking the NFL, talking the draft, what's wrong with the Texans, what do the Chargers expect from Herbert. I had a great time with that conversation. And I also think it's great for Tuttle and I to kind of mix things up. Obviously, we're very good at baseball and talking about that and bringing you the information. But on that last one, we had a chance to talk NFL. Did you enjoy that one as much as I did, Tuttle?
Absolutely. I felt like mixing up the topics were great. And, as much as we think we know about sports as like an armchair quarterback or having played professionally, I think having someone like Jeff come in and give us another G off on the podcast, give us a little insight. I thought we talked about it last podcast, but a couple of things that he brought up were things that I had never even thought of or considered. So it was fascinating. He was a great guest. And I definitely think that, if we continue to implement guys like that into our podcast, it's going to make us smarter and certainly probably more enjoyable for the fans as well.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I can't wait to see the feedback on it, see how many views everybody gets. And of course, you can go to bleacherblums.com and you can go to the mailbag and give us your questions. You can give us your comments. Let us know the feedback. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review. But I think that we are going to try and incorporate a couple of interview shows in there, whether it be baseball, golf, football, NCAA. We're going to try and find some different topics. Shoot, I even know I could probably get one of my good friends is on Housewives of Beverly Hills. Maybe we could go into pop culture a little bit and have her on. That would be highly entertaining, and I know it would probably get some reasonably interesting exposure and would probably help everybody get away from my bachelorette conversations that we have, unfortunately, more often than not.
I was going to say that might upset the folks that tune in for non-Bachelor content. We got a few tweets that we were going down the wrong path with The Bachelor. But like you said, hey, if you rub elbows with people that are on popular TV shows and we're looking for some exposure, maybe it creates a broader dynamic and a broader audience. We'll have to see how it goes. But definitely, we enjoyed having Schwartzy on, and I think that's going to, kind of lead us down another path and hopefully broaden our horizons and our listeners' horizons.
Yeah, Jeff is definitely going to give us a little credibility in the NFL situation. And it's kind of nice having some of these analysts, if we can get them on, because you and I are both fans of the sport of football itself. And so hopefully we're asking questions that normal fans would ask, but he had some great answers for us. And also on our so they've gone on there and purchased a couple hats. We greatly appreciate that. The representation is great, but the T-shirts have been phenomenal too. And I've actually referred a couple of my friends who are trying to start their own businesses and want some of these T-shirts. I referred them to Ram Shirts, and they have done a phenomenal job with them, working with them. The shirts are high quality. They're tagless. The cotton is soft and everything's great. But I know you got more on this one, Tuttle.
Yeah, I do. They're going to. They're actually in one of the mailbag questions, so we'll sneak up the listeners' mailbag question once we get on there. I do have I'm wearing today a social distancing shirt.
Hey, we are the best practicing social distancing podcast ever.
Yeah, I think so, and we even have a shirt to prove it from Crush City Tees over there at Ram Shirts. But I want the back has a give me 6 feet on it, but I can't stand up. I'm all wired into my microphone here. But we're super happy with the quality of the shirt and definitely the expediency which with Mark turns the shirts around, and it's certainly given our podcast and our I guess our listeners as well some exposure that we might not have gotten otherwise, and we're just super happy to be supported by Crush City Tees and Ram Shirts. For the podcast.
We are grateful for them, and we're also grateful for our fans. And with our fans getting into the mailbag, we're going to just take this podcast alone to answer some of those questions that maybe we've missed in the last two podcasts, because I think we're going to try and focus our podcast a little more on content and then have the mailbag mixed in there and just dedicated to you who are listening right now for the fans to give us those mailbag questions. And I know Tuttle's got quite a few, so here we go with the
Nice.
mailbag.
I was going to say one last thing. I got my Bleacher Blums hat there. That's another Crush City Tees product. So look, we're doing the best we can. All right. So first question, Blummer, Tuttle, love the show, and I appreciate having some baseball talk to listen to while I work from home. That's in air quotes, which is great. When I think about the potential to not have a 2020 baseball season and the Astros who will be free agents at the end of the year, I wonder if guys like Springer, Reddick, Correa, etc., feel like they owe it to the fans to stay in Houston for a bit longer, or just enjoy the year of not getting beaned and bail for more money. What do you guys think?
That is the ultimate question. I think that's the hardest thing right now, is for fans to figure out what the roster is going to look like in 2021, because if there is no 2020, you're not going to see those guys who are going to be potential free agents play this season. So you might be missing out on their last year in that uniform. The Dodgers are in a unique situation with Mookie Betts, who they just traded for. He may just be somebody they acquired on a piece of paper, and he becomes a free agent and he's gone. But the Astros are in a unique situation with several guys, Michael, mostly in their outfield too, which is kind of crazy. You've got Michael Brantley on the last year of his contract, Josh Reddick on the last year of his contract. And then you have George Springer as probably the most noticeable guy. And the question is about loyalty. And I just had an opportunity earlier to talk to Craig Biggio, and I know I keep saying obviously a lot. It's funny when you do these podcasts, how you realize what words you say a lot. And
I say it too.
It's free agency, it's money, it's what the player wants, where his family lives. And George is actually planted here. I'm not sure what suburb or where he's at in Houston, but he lives here. So I'm kind of hoping that encourages him to stay, because he understands this fan base loves him to death. But as much as a player who is a free agent enjoys the city they came up with, enjoys the community that he is in, never discount the money. Garrett Cole is a guy who said he loved Houston, but he took the money and ran to New York. George Springer is a little bit different story in the sense that he's going to be highly paid, but at the same time, he has a much larger heart, I feel, than Garrett Cole. He has a little more of a connection with this organization and with this community. And so that's the positive side. But the negative side is, if you go back to 2014 when George got called up, he felt under the Super 2, the time, the control, team control situation. And I'm not sure if that still has lingering effects on George and his feelings towards the Astros. Because at the time it was Jeff Luhnow who was the GM. And we know how teams can not manipulate the service control, but maybe massage it a little bit. And they did that with George because they were pushing George back and holding him back, because they knew the 2014 team wasn't going to be the team that goes to a championship. They knew it was going to be this window we're in right now, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, where they were going to use George. So I'm not sure if that has a lingering effect, or maybe James Click being the GM now helps the cause that Jeff Luhnow isn't there, because Jeff is the guy who held George Springer down. But it's all up in the air. We have no idea until we actually talk to George and see what he does at the end of the year. But he's going to garner a large contract.
Yeah, he is. And we've talked about this before as well. I believe that the type of player you are has a lot to do with whether you're going to take the money or not. I mean, the larger contracts, like a Springer, like you said, if he's looking at a multi-year deal, the Mookie Betts of the world, those guys are kind of pushed or encouraged by the MLBPA, the Players Association, to pursue as much as they can on the open market, because it elevates it's kind of like the rising tide lifts all boats thing. It makes the contracts better for everybody if they're able to do it. We mentioned Tony Gwynn on this podcast before. There's some unique situations, Hall of Famers that may be on the back end of their career that, take a little bit of a discount or stay in city, get another year or two on that contract because of what they bring to the city overall. And that's a unique situation. But I think there's definitely some variables, like you said. We're doing the Grinch thing. The Grinch's heart grew three sizes that day. I mean, it's not to say Garrett Cole doesn't have a good heart, but he had almost 300 million reasons to leave. And I think that, we'll have to see what Springer does in terms of what pressure he gets put on him by the Players Association, as well as, as what his heart tells him and his gut tells him.
Yeah. And what Tuttle's referring to is a conversation that we had several podcasts ago about some of these contracts. Actually, I think it was around when Garrett Cole signed, is that the union is paying attention to these, and the union wants the players to push the market. They do understand occasionally they do take a little bit of a discount to stay in the town that they're in, but at the same time, they highly encourage the guy taking the highest price possible, because it kind of trickles down to guys below who push their market up a little bit too. And it's all about getting as much money as you can in this moment, because Tuttle and I can both attest to the fact that even though we're still involved with baseball and able to talk about it, your playing career in the grand scheme of things, it's not even this much. It is just a minute fraction of your entire life. So you got to maximize your earning potential while you're still playing.
Yeah, and it's really unique in the world in general. I mean, I think that's what people misunderstand. I mean, if you had made so much money that you didn't have to work, it'd be interesting to see if you would be broadcasting. I know I wouldn't be in medical sales. Yeah. And I think that your point is well taken. You have 3 or 4, I have 3 kids, you have 4 kids to put through college. Until that time happens and until we get into that retirement stage, I mean, like you said, you have to maximize your earning space in there. And so although it looks like a lot of money to an outsider and per day and per, service time and per contract, it's a lot of money. But if you have to spread that out over 20, 30, 40 years, there are people that argue, well, you could do some other job. You could go to work then and you can make that money. It's like, look, this is kind of what your skill set allowed you to do. And I know plenty of guys, unlike you and myself, that didn't get their college degree and don't have a college education. And, this is kind of their one shot. And like you said, you have to maximize your earning potential. So I don't begrudge those guys doing that at all.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. Way to get us fired up and started. This one's a little bit longer. There is a question at the end, but I thought this was worthwhile. This has to do with the Crush City Tees thing that we talked about before. Crush City Tees brought to you by Ram Shirts. Hey guys, this will be a bit on the long side, but I think it's worthwhile. I have a comment on one of your sponsors and then a question. I jumped on one of the fishing shirts you're selling with Crush City Tees. Due to logistical issues caused by COVID-19, the guys at Ram Shirts are having a hard time getting the materials. When I inquired about when the shirts might be available, they were quick to communicate with me to explain what's going on and even offered some free swag while I wait. I declined the free swag since we're all facing unusual issues right now, but I think they're deserving of a customer plug for their willingness to quickly and honestly respond to a customer and volunteer to keep us happy even when it's a small sale. 2 big thumbs up for the folks at Crush City Tees and Ram Shirts. How about that?
Outstanding.
We couldn't have got a better plug, and that's from somebody writing in. So this is Dave, by the way, writing in.
So Dave, thank you for doing that. And my good buddy David on the other side, guess what he is always complaining about? Customer service.
Oh, that's right. That's the What'll Tuttle Say topic du jour.
Right?
Yeah, there you go.
But we're not going to have those issues with Ram Shirts. Apparently, they're doing a good job of making sure everybody's taken care of.
That's right, Blummer.
Nice.
I like it. Now, for a question. Without any real target date available, how would you as players try to manage staying prepared for baseball? My guess is that MLB will try to keep any preseason to a minimum so that will tax players, especially pitchers, more than a normal season start. How does a pitcher go about building up his arm or hitter refining his timing at this point? Is there really anything they can do other than work out and stay loose? Thanks for keeping up with the podcast and cranking out episodes. I've been listening since number 1 and haven't missed a single one yet. I hope y'all haven't forgotten the idea of a live podcast at St. Arnold's. It's something I'm certainly looking forward to when the madness ends. I completely agree. I can't wait to get on an airplane and head out to Houston myself, Dave.
Dave, that's good. And I think it's going to be easier for hitters. It's just going to be a timing issue, but I think it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks to get these guys ready. It's timing. From what I've seen, a lot of these guys have cages. They have the ability to get to facilities to work out. So I'm not so much concerned about that. I worry about the conditioning. That's probably the most concerning thing for me. from a position player standpoint is the conditioning. Will these guys have the endurance to be able to sprint through the end of the season, if there is one, and keep their legs right? But I think these guys are good enough, man. You know, I'm spoiled watching the Astros as often as I do because I know Altuve can roll out of bed and get you 2 or 3 knocks. Bregman, I think, is going to battle you for some at-bats. George Springer, we've seen him show up on day games, take the first pitch 900 feet. So, you know, these guys I'm not so much worried about as far as, you know, turning it on and getting those hits and being on time. It's the day-to-day 4 at-bats immediately right after sitting down for 2 or 3 months. That's the only thing for me. But I think the question is more for you, and I'm curious to hear what you say, because the starting pitching is the one I am most curious about. How are these guys going to be able to – they extended themselves and then they pull back for 2 months. Are they going to be able to extend themselves and ramp up? I don't know how that's going to work. So this is on you, Tuttle.
Yeah, you know, great question. I appreciate writing in. I think from a preparation standpoint, you and I have talked about this, I think previously, for the experienced guys, spring training tends to be a lot of kind of like loosening up and getting yourself mentally ready. They do stretch guys out. I don't think spring training was long enough at this point to stretch guys out, really. I don't think the starters were on 6 or 7 before they shut it down. And honestly, they do this in basketball all the time where they say, well, you got to be game ready. There's going to be a little ramp up period. I mean, I don't think you're going to see JV come out and throw 8 innings to start. Now, if we have the extra inning kind of thing added into the season, or if we do double headers that are 7-inning games and those guys take the ball, it's going to be a different dynamic. So there's some other variables outside that the actual preparation of the players. But I do think that I touched on this last podcast or the one before, I guess it was 2 podcasts ago, about this season is an advantage for teams like the Yankees, the Astros, the Dodgers, because it's more of a sprint. I mean, if they get cranking, you know, June 15th or July 1st, which the rumor is possibly July 1st. If they get cranking July 1st, it's, hey, July, August, September, maybe October, and then you have the postseason in November, kind of early November. It's a very short season. And so you can kind of air it out and gas it out, and you don't really need that kind of ramp up and that holding back, like saving innings for the postseason. So I think the experience and the teams with a more, mature group of players and the payroll have an advantage this season for sure. And I'm sure they'll be prepared once the bell rings, especially if it's as late as July 1st.
Nice.
All right, let's keep plugging away. A lot of good questions. I think we have about 6 or 7 of these, and we're just going to make this the whole podcast today. So this is from David. I guess I choose names that I like. You know, we had Dave last time. This is from David. So
it seems fair. We had a G off on last podcast, right. So why not have a couple of Davids on this one?
There you go. It's only fair. That's right. And there are no G offs writing in, so we'll have to see if Jeff Schwartz ever writes in, or your buddy Jeff Geary. So here we go. With the current cancellation of life, I've been watching plenty of old games from my childhood, 1980 to 85. While watching these games, I've been wearing out baseballreference.com, looking back at particular players' career paths. Lonnie Smith played in the World Series for 4 different teams: Phillies, Cardinals, Royals, Braves, winning rings with the first 3. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Terry Pendleton went 0 for 4 in the World Series, while just missing out on rings with the 82 Cardinals, 95 Braves, and 97 Marlins. He came up with the Cardinals in 83, left Atlanta after 94, and left the Marlins after 96. Did either of you guys play with a guy that was this lucky or unlucky? And I thought that was just I don't know if I'll be able to come up with a player, but I just thought that was a fantastic question, and somebody who obviously delved into the research. So,
yeah, it would take a lot of time. It wouldn't take a lot of time, because all you'd have to do is think of a name and look up their career. But you know, Tony Gwynn got into the World Series and didn't win. But you'd be amazed at how many guys that have these lengthy careers, 15, 20 years, and didn't get to a playoffs, number one, or didn't even get to a World Series. And then you hear stories like, we're going to the Hall of Fame and not going to the World Series, or is it going to the World Series multiple times and losing every time you get there? So, there's guys on that Dodgers roster right now that are, in that situation of, man, we've been to the last dance, but we haven't been able to finish this thing off. And that's got to be concerning. I think one of the most amazing stats into the World Series, won it with the Tigers and the Dodgers, never played an all-star game. How does that guy not play in an all-star game? You win an MVP, you should be in an all-star game. So how does that happen? The other one is right here, Nolan Ryan, strikeout king. No Cy Young? I mean, what competition are we going up against? So the World Series is a great question, but those are the anomalies, I think, in the sport that really pique the fascination. And thank God that we have the resources of the internet that, we can look these things up. And then all of a sudden you go, man, that guy had a great career, but he never did this. And it's amazing.
Well, we have the pandemic so that we have a little extra time on our hand to do the research, because I'm not a great researcher in general, but to have the pandemic time to go look at that. It's funny. I wish I was more of a baseball kind of savant or enthusiast. I know you use baseballreference.com and some other sites that are super valuable when you're kind of trying to do an overall analysis or a comp for guys. But the guy that I always think of, because Charles Barkley gets a lot of heat, right? Charles Barkley was an MVP in the NBA and never won a title. And Robert Horry has 7 rings, just sitting on the bench. Yeah, big shot Bob. And so I think you could probably come up, if we sat here long enough, with a bunch of anomalies like that, where, Robert Horry a better basketball player than Charles Barkley? No, he wasn't on the dream team. He wasn't, as highly regarded. He was a great shooter, and nobody can take that away from him. But 7 rings is, I think that's kind of sneaky lucky. And, luck is the residue of design. I mean, I could always put my career in that spot. We talked about some guys that I knew, roommates of mine and teammates of mine that went to the big leagues, that maybe didn't have the fanfare coming out of the draft that I did. But, you just never know how it's going to shake out. So there's a little hard work. There's a little luck. There's a little, there are a couple of things that you got to get to go your way. And I think we could probably, along with Lonnie Smith and Terry Pendleton, kind of weave a tapestry of guys that have had good luck and guys that have had bad luck. And, it's just kind of part of life, isn't it? So,
yeah, I think Reggie Sanders is another guy that went to, like 4 straight World Series with 4 different teams. I mean, what are the chances? But I say it all the time. Timing is everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that works for hitting too, right? Timing is everything. It's a good motto to have if you're a hitter.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So another question, just jumping ahead. Arthur G says, hey, in your last podcast, and I think this might have been a couple podcasts ago, but bear with me. I don't always get to the mailbag as I should. In your last podcast, you briefly discussed youth sports. Could you spend more time sharing your thoughts on youth baseball? Example, the age at which kids move to select ball, finding good teams with sensible coaches when it's too much, how to encourage kids to work hard for their dream, that's easy for me to say, without crossing the line to crazy dad. I have a 9-year-old playing on a select team with a coach who seems very level-headed. I think we got lucky. I enjoy listening to you guys and respect your opinions, so I'm guessing you have some good insight on this topic. I'm a bit older, so select or travel sports didn't really exist when I was a kid. Thanks for doing the podcast. I'm hooked. You guys are helping us get through this crazy time. So thanks, Arthur. We really appreciate it.
I actually think it is a question or a topic that Tuttle and I probably talk about more than any other off air. And it was kind of interesting. We had this question a couple of podcasts ago. We didn't get in depth as far as in depth as we wanted to. And just in thinking through it, and we're old enough too, where we didn't play club or select when we were in youth sports, but at the same time in baseball, the longer you played into the summer meant the better you were, because you basically started with your high school team, and then you moved to your local league, whether it be Pony League or whatever it was. And then when that ended, you went to area codes, you went to Legion Ball. There were other leagues that all of a sudden kind of came these pseudo all-star teams as the area grew, because it was basically high school, city, county or whatever region you're in, and it just expanded and kept getting bigger and bigger. And the better you played, the longer you played, because you were on those all-star teams. And I kind of like that aspect, and I don't know how these select club teams work. I know that there's varying levels that you can play, because having been through the volleyball situation I've been in with my daughters, I know that they have an elite level, and then they have 2 levels underneath, and you've got to play your way onto the elite teams. They say sometimes it can be a little political if the parent pushes the right buttons or annoys the coach enough or director and says my son should be on there. But at the same time, I like the idea of earning your way onto a better team moving forward. But again, from 9 to 12, I remember playing, but I don't remember being good. I don't remember being good until I was about 14, 15 years old, where I got a little bit stronger, got a little bit bigger, and I started to pass some of the guys that were just badasses when they were 12 years old. Because there were some dominant dudes when I was 12. I was like, that guy's awesome. That guy's awesome. And I was kind of like, how am I going to compete with that? And then lo and behold, 2-3 years later, I'm like, that guy's not even making the team. So it's kind of interesting how that unfolds. And every kid's going to be different, obviously. But I really felt like I matured a little bit later. But at the same time, my incentive to play wasn't to pay to play on a team to get exposure. My job was to play well enough to get on a team so I could get exposure. Ideas like that, how it was different then and how it's different now, where it feels like you can almost pay to play, but are you getting the appropriate exposure? Are you getting the appropriate teaching? And for me, the biggest thing is, are you getting the best competition to show off your talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of always with youth sports, like big fish, little pond. And when you make that step, I know I played a travel soccer ball in Connecticut. I played travel soccer. And when people said, oh, you're 12, you're 13, you're playing travel soccer, you must be really good, right? Because they knew you were on the travel ball team, which they didn't have. Like you said, they didn't have club or select or anything like this. So if you were playing travel ball, they pulled you out of a pool, you tried out, you made this team. If you tell somebody, like you said, you're playing club volleyball or club soccer, I mean, that doesn't tell them anything. They're kind of like, oh, well, what does that mean? What level? Well, I'm playing flight 3 or flight 4 or flight 5 or flight 6. I mean, I don't even know what these flights mean. And that's the pay to play aspect. So I do think it's kind of up to the individual and up to the individual parent. I mean, you have 3 girls that are exactly the same age. I have 2 girls that are exactly the same age. One of them happens to be a good athlete. One of them's not into sports at all. So I kind of let them dictate, meaning, oh yeah, you want to go hit some balls, you want to go practice, that's great. And then they'll kind of tell you, you'll be able to see them against the competition. You'll be able to see them measure up to these people that are in your area. I have a really kind of it's a short story that kind of goes to that. But when I was in Little League in Connecticut, we won the state championship 3 years in a row, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old Little League teams. So 13 was pony ball, I think at the time, or Colt. And when I was 11, when I was 11, we went to the the Little League World Series in Williamsport. I was an alternate on the All-Star team. So the alternates, didn't get to go with the team. When I was 12, we came 2 games away from going back. That was heartbreak, heartache. Do you know how many guys off this team that won 3 state championships in a row in Connecticut? We won the whole state 3 years in a row, beat every Little League, went all the way, 3 hours of travel, beat all these teams. How many guys ended up ever playing professional baseball? 2 out of 30 guys.
Wow.
And one of them was drafted out of like the University of New Haven in the 20th round. He was our stud at 12 years old. He got drafted out of the University of New Haven, and then I don't even know if he made it out of rookie ball. And then myself, who was a skinny catcher who, could barely hit the ball. I was like a singles hitter as a 12-year-old, and I was one of the only guys that could catch these guys that were throwing hard. And that was it. So even then, as you pointed out, this dude is awesome, and that guy's great, and this guy's awesome. I was the only guy that went on to play, and I guarantee you there was about 15 guys on that team that people would have said, oh, now that guy, he's going to make it. Oh no, that guy's going to make it, So I think it really has to come down to the individual ultimately in terms of the path that you're going to be on and the path that you're going to take. I know that's kind of a generic answer or a general answer to a very specific question, but I think if your son's enjoying it and you feel good about your coach who's very level-headed, I think you're probably doing all the right things to get him kind of the exposure and the excitement and the enjoyment of the game that he needs.
Yeah, and I think if you watch The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, if you talk about Kobe Bryant, if you talk about LeBron James, if you talk about some of these greats, Mike Trout, watch and hear and listen how people talk about them, because a lot of what I hear is passion. It's will to win, not giving in, not breaking down. These guys work harder than anybody else. Obviously, they're uber talented, but you keep hearing about the passion. the will to win, and the work ethic. So if you can kind of take bits and pieces of that knowledge and apply it to yourself, I think that's how you can kind of create a player that goes out there and maybe overachieves a little bit too, because not everybody's going to roll out of bed and be a Mike Trout or Jose Altuve or George Springer. You got to be able to go out there and be willing to work. And a lot of it has to do with that internal fire that these guys are showing.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Blummer. And I think, like you said, you can kind of tell that at a young age. It's so funny when you and I have personal conversations, you always talk about you having the red ass or snapping at something, and we don't get to see that personality. And I think that I probably have a little competitive fire and competitive juices somewhere under the surface. But they don't kind of get to rear their head anymore as much as they used to, because we're not doing this for a living, and we're not doing this for, to be the stand on the mountaintop like you did. Back in 2005. So I think there are some things that get mellowed out with age. People always say that, right? You mellow with age, but there was definitely an internal fire. And I've said this a bunch of times on here. I mean, when I was bored, I went out and shot free throws or dribbled the basketball around the driveway. I took a tennis ball and threw it against the garage 100 million times. I played wiffle ball. Like, my thing was active and activity, and I was super competitive at that. And I would, my uncle and my brother, there are people that will still tell you that, you don't want to play Monopoly with me, even though I can't stand Monopoly anymore. So I don't see that from myself now as I mellow with age and I try and raise kids, but there's something underneath as well when you talk about Kobe and Michael and, Verlander and, some of these guys that want to be kind of the top of their profession. So.
Yeah, I think you could say, but I love the fact that you brought up what you did as a kid by yourself, because I was the same way. I had a brother who was 5 years younger than me, and I would just go out and destroy him in wiffle ball, so it wasn't that much fun. But I would take a golf ball. We finally, in our backyard where I was growing up, we finally got a cinder block wall put up around the perimeter of our backyard. I would take a golf ball, and I would stand in the set position, and I would throw this thing as hard as I could against the cinder block wall. And, if it hit the cinder block perfectly, it would come back to me on a one hop, and I'd make it look good and fake a double play. And I would have my glove on too, my normal playing glove. But there would be moments where it caught a seam or where the grout or where the cement was holding the bricks together. Oh man, dude! And this thing would hit it. It would fire it, over my head into the neighbor's yard, like 2 doors down. I'd have to go down there. Hey, can you give me a golf ball? But then there would be other times where it would hit and shoot straight down and turn into these just wicked, nasty hops. And I'd come back in, I'd have a welt on my chest, my nose would kind of be bleeding a little bit. Mom's going, "What are you doing?" I'm in the backyard kicking my own ass,
That's
that's where
he's kicking his own ass.
If you're willing, I was going all Ken Giles on myself.
Yeah.
But that's where you kind of find that desire. And right now, just a little bit of dad bragging right here. My daughters, during this whole COVID issue, they haven't been able to get to a court too often, but they'll go outside, and there's 4 of them now, and they're out there setting, bumping, spiking, doing their. And I mean, I'm like, oh, look at, they're doing it on their own. And all of a sudden I get fired up, because that's where I think you agree, where maybe your son playing the piano when he's not being told to, or it's not practice time. You're kind of like, you hear the tune in the background, you go, he's doing it, and I get excited about it. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anytime your kids are doing something that they enjoy, that you feel like is going to propel them to be better or focused, or they have that own, personal drive to do, I take so much pride in that.
Me too.
So
man.
Anyway, that was a great question. Got us all fired up. We got a couple more, hopefully short ones here, and then the Mailbag podcast will be over. Let's see. Oh yeah, here. I like this one. I actually had a question for you. I'm going to save it for next podcast, but it's related to this. Blummer and Tuttle, thanks for the good content these last few weeks of the quarantine. Yeah, hopefully it's the last few weeks. I know in Texas it seems like it is. I don't know if we're heading into the last few weeks or the last few months for us out here in Cali. Question for Blummer. And don't give the secrets away, Blummer. If it takes 10 hours, don't give it away. Question for Blummer. What does the average prep time look like for broadcasting an average game? What are you doing before the game, and how long are you prepping? What are you doing during the game? What are you looking at on the field and on the computer to stay on top of whatever happens? You and TK have a great broadcast. I imagine it takes a lot of work, but it seems effortless. Keep up the good work. Thanks for keeping the episodes coming.
Who wrote that one in?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Let me get on so that's John M. Sorry about
Okay.
that, John.
No, we just give him shout outs, John M. That is a very, very good question. The broadcasting part of it is a little bit different, and what a lot of people don't know is that we actually do have a producer who we have production meetings with before the game, and it's usually about an hour and a half before the game. We'll just go through a rundown of ideas and graphics and highlight reels that we want to see, and certain guys we want to highlight and talk about. But as far as getting ready for the game, I usually will wake up, I'll go work out, have a bite to eat, and then I'll come back and I'll get in my office and not my office, or if I'm at home, I'm in my office, but if I'm on the road, I'll just sit down at the desk in the room and I'll pull up my score sheet from the night before, look at who pitched, try and figure out what the bullpen might look like for the next day. And then look at the starting pitcher for the other team, and I'll start filling out my scorecard. And I wish I had a copy of my scorecard, because on the video podcast that we have on our social Nostra network, you'd be able to see. Maybe next time I'll do it. I want to be prepared enough to where I can go, this is why I pulled that number up. This is why I'm talking about this guy. So I do a lot of my prep work in filling out my scorecard, and it kind of, in doing so, it'll spark an idea. I'll write down the idea. I'll look it up, or if I'm in the same room with TK or Steve Sparks, Robert Ford, I'll kind of go, hey guys, do you got on that? Or do you think this is going to affect this guy that way? And we talk about matchups. TK is one of the most prepared dudes I've ever seen in my life. I absolutely love him for that, because a lot of what I do during the game is on feel and reaction to gameplay. And if I have a sense that Altuve's gotten 5 hits every day for the last week, TK will actually jump in and go, yes, Jeff, he's actually 7 for his last 14. He is hitting 500. So that's why it feels the way it does. He does a very good job of picking up on my emotion and putting a number to it, which I greatly appreciate. But we do put a lot of effort and a lot of time into it. Now, as far as gameplay, TK's in charge of play-by-play. So my seat is perfect, because I can sit back, watch the field of play, wait for the pitch to be thrown, see where the ball goes, see how the players react, and then I can offer my analysis on it. What do you do that for? Instead of really taking that step back and seeing the field. But I always like to, before each pitch, before each hitter, kind of scan the field and see where they're playing him. Is the shift on him? Where are the outfielders at? Where are the base runners at? And see how that adjusts the situation. And I try and do much like I did, and Tuttle probably did the same thing when he was on the mound, is you kind of put yourself in the situation where, when whatever position you're at on the field, and you say, what do I do if the ball's hit to me? So that's kind of what I'm asking myself as I'm watching the game unfold, is what would I do if the ball was hit to me? And so I'm saying, essentially, by the end of the replay, or what I'm talking about is, this is what Correa was thinking before the play, and that's why he accomplished it. So there's a lot going on. It's a very good question.
Yeah, old habits die hard, Blummer, and I think that's a really good point. I think that's how I kind of look at this podcast or anything else that you do, is kind of, what were you thinking? And I think that's why it's insightful, because, those habits that we developed over years of playing, what pitch are you going to throw this guy? If he swings at this pitch, what are you going to do with the next pitch? Or, darn well, when it's 2-0 and you got to throw a meatball in there, like, how are you going to make that meatball look less appealing to the hitter? I mean, there's all kinds of thoughts going through your head. And, every once in a while, like you said, you'd rather throw a meatball than walk this guy. So you're almost tipping your cap. Like, if this guy can smoke one, then, tip my cap, because I'll get more trouble, per se, if I walk this guy based on your whip number. I think the other thing we could do for Blum's Blast next time is bring a scorecard, maybe instead of using a statistic or something. Since we have the video medium, you can talk through the type of notes that you take, but certainly being prepared. But I would relate it exactly to what you said. I think any of these, with the podcast, you and I have notes here. We have thoughts. We sometimes discuss the topics beforehand. I think it's the same thing with a broadcast. And it was the same thing when we were playing, is that you kind of had an idea who was pitching, if he was left-handed or right-handed, what he's done to you in the past. All of that stuff becomes relevant and necessary as you move forward. And that's it for the mailbag. I was going to throw one more at you, but I think we're good. We're running out of time here. So I think we'll save that last mail question for the next time we do the mailbag. And I want to say, I hope this was informative of the fans. This is everything that they contributed. So a lot of the content, a lot of the material, obviously, for this podcast was driven by you guys, the listeners. We encourage you to rate, review, subscribe to the Bleacher BLUMS podcast. Again, support crushcitytees.com. We have Jake from Just Geek It, who's helping us out as well. So we're just super thankful for everybody that's kind of been along for the ride and been with us from the beginning. And I hope that everybody enjoys this this kind of little variance with our NFL podcast coming out and our Mailbag podcast today. I hope that we'll be able to talk baseball again here shortly. And you know, happy quarantine to everybody. Hopefully we're still surviving.
Yeah, very well said. Great episode for us to be able to do this. Oddly enough, it's episode number 69 for us. So we know Rob Gronkowski would be very proud of us making it this far into our podcast careers. It was a good one. The mailbag is great. And again, you can go to bleacherblums.com and go ahead and get into that mailbag and give us your questions and your critiques and your comments. But you can also go to YouTube and go to the Social Nostra channel, subscribe, and you'll get all the updates on when these podcasts are coming out. We appreciate all the information, all the questions that we do get. We'd like to thank the first responders, military, all the essential workers out there, healthcare providers. You are doing a phenomenal job. Continue to do what you do. Know that we are thinking about you and we are cheering you on. But hopefully things can get back to a little bit of normalcy, and hopefully next couple of podcasts we'll have some great news. And like Tuttle said, start talking some more about baseball, potentially getting back on the field, because Korea's out there. They had their opening day. Taiwan's playing baseball. And to be honest, I'm a little bit jealous, and I have not watched any Korean baseball because I think Major League Baseball is the best product out there. But it's great that those guys in Korea are getting the exposure right now to maybe shine a light on what they can do. But that's going to do it for this episode of Bleacher BLUMS. And what we say at the end of every podcast is, get the hell out of the bleachers. No, I'm just kidding. Get after it. But most of all, believe it.